One of the things that we do in almost every game we have ever played is traverse space. Most games are set in a physical world that we navigate by moving around, and so a lot of effort is put into these spaces communicating to the player where it is that they are supposed to be going. If I stand here and show you this corridor, or stand here and show you from a slightly different angle, do you think you know what's going on at the end of it? It turns right and leads into another room. Maybe that was so obvious it wasn't worth mentioning. Here's another one, and another one, and a fourth one. Let's go back to the first one. There is actually a ton of subtle design considerations going on here that you may not think about when you initially glance at this space. Here's some arrows to point out some of the design. Does that help? It might be a worthwhile challenge to pause here, take a guess at what each of the arrows is, and then continue with the video. You can follow along and see if you got them. In this video, I'm going to go through each of these things and talk about how it was used and how it affects the readability of this space. Hopefully by the end, we will have some tricks that we can think about when we are making our own corridors and bends. My name is Giggity McD, and this is Design Run, a casual series of videos where we break down game design. The inspiration for this video came from a GDC presentation from 2013 by Brendon Chung, the founder of Blendo Games. In this talk, he discusses some of his methodology for making games, and how he used these techniques creating 30 Flights of Loving. A portion of what I'm going over here is from the talk, and you should go over and watch it. It's about 20 minutes long, links in the description. Firstly, let's talk about the elevation. One of the things Brendon uses fairly heavily is this idea that different spaces are at different elevations. You can see in this corridor the floor dips before the stairs start here, and the stairs take the player further down into a different height before turning the corner. You can see it here in this section also, in the after game scene, where the floor dips down into this connection corridor, then rises back up to the same level at the adjoining room. This technique is also used to vary up other spaces, such as here, where a long corridor is broken up with a raised section, and here, where the floor to the right of our corridor dips slightly, leading out onto this viewing platform to denote the difference in the space. When applied to the corridor, it is easy to tell that this space is separate from the one before it. It also helps each section stand out as a distinct area as opposed to one continuous area. In this example, the roof line also sells this drop in elevation by continuing rather than dipping down with the stairs. By using changing heights, the spaces are being communicated as two distinct, separate areas. Moving on, one of the first things you may have noticed about the design of this bend is the angled wall on the left-hand side. This is a very obvious geometry choice that, from a distance, enhances the readability of the corner significantly. It blocks the space where a corner would be on the left-hand side and naturally leads the eye and the player to the right. It makes the space feel a bit more like a tube and less like the joining of right angles, and also eliminates the possibility of a T-bend, which may be misinterpreted at a glance. This technique is implemented in a few ways throughout 30 Flights of Loving. Here in our example corridor, and here in the side corridor, where the angled section is much smaller. A similar technique is used here to the same effect, where the roof supports provide some information to which way the corridor turns. The roof supports here couldn't exist without a wall, and their absence on this side implies that the path bends in that direction. A simple way to think about this is that the other option for a T-bend is blocked off, so it's either a turn to one side or a dead end, and the shape is very odd for it to be a dead end. We don't have to use angled wall geometry though. You could achieve the same effect with a holographic board or some rocks, or one of these things. Just something that leads the player's attention. And now let's shift gears for a sec. It is probably worth saying that you don't have to design corridors like this, or corners. It's hardly required. And I will be the first to admit that this content is getting down to a pretty granular level, and Brendon mirrors this sentiment a couple of times in his GDC talk. What we are doing here is going through a series of tools that you can think about and maybe apply in various places in your game. For example, you may have way too many elbow bends to go through this much detail for all of them. But you could always use them in a scripted sequence like this one from Tomb Raider, where readability is important. Set piece sequences like this lose a lot of their weight if you die and need to redo them 5 times. On the 5th time, it's not such a clutch escape after all. Anyway, back to it. Okay, how about this light? That looks like it helps. Yep, that would also be one of our things. Light is hugely important in game design. It is one of the most powerful tools that we have in our toolbox, as it is so deeply baked into our psychology. Here, it creates a bright spot at the end of the corridor. This draws our attention. It also creates this high contrast area when compared to the visual space around us, and this attracts us. It illuminates the geometry that we just mentioned, so it's easy to see that the space dips down, and it's easy to read the angled wall. Not to mention, it's somewhat of a point of interest. Why would the bottom of a dead end be so well illuminated? Lights get regularly used to help improve the player's movement through the level. Here you can see 2 blue lights at the end of the corridor with the roof supports. Again, lighting up the area, showing a wall on the other side to the bend. You can also take advantage of another funny property of light: falloff. Here the lights fall off in this direction, falling behind the wall, making this stark line of contrast. This lets us know that there isn't anything on that side of the corridor, because otherwise the light would be illuminating it and we would see it. This next example is a good example of its use. This section is clearly illuminated and creates a contrast between this section and this section of the wall, but also this section and this section of the floor. But we can't actually see the light. The dev is using just the light fall off to tell you that the corner turns to the right, because there needs to be a source for that light and we can't see it yet. Now, let's swap a few things around and take a look at another technique that isn't utilized as well in our example corridor, and that's props. I'm calling it props anyway. It's just things that you place to imply the corner's direction. Windows, chairs, posters, rails, seats, signs, stuff on the floor like water. Put something against the far wall or in the corridor and hide a portion of it around the corner, so it is cut off by the inner wall. You can see in our previous example that these wanted posters are used, and the player can assume that they continue around the corner. Here, there are tons of people walking back and forth. The chair also illustrates the technique by being cut off, but the people moving back and forth will be what the player sees in this case. As we come up this incline, we can see that there are alternating posters. And here is one example that uses this technique almost exclusively. This section is only communicating with a light fall off and the information panel stuck to the far wall. Pretty nifty and very versatile. We have one more, but just before we get there, if you are new and haven't subscribed yet, do that. Lots of great game design content to be had. And everyone else, do all the like, comment, YouTube button stuff. So the last one is peeking. Peeking is this idea that the space that you are about to go into peeks around the corner of the previous space. This isn't a technical term, but it accurately reflects what we're trying to achieve here. You can see in our main example that this slither of the next room can be seen, letting the player know that there is something to find at the end of the elbow bend. This isn't going to be ideal for every situation, because it will lead to some weird geometry and doorways might be difficult to align and things like that. But this could be used to inform the player of things like side rooms from a main space, or maybe let a player know that a passage leads outside by showing some of the outer area through the gap. If you like all this technical design stuff, go and check out the GDC talk from Brendon. There's more good tips and tricks to be gained. There's a card on the screen right now. That's all from me. Good to be back at it. I'll see you in the next one.